Welcome back to the archives, where we explore the impossible intersections of worlds and gods. Today, we ask what would happen if Sukuna, the king of curses from Jujutsu Kaisen, entered the Warhammer 40K universe and became the fifth Chaos god. Imagine the warp itself stabilizing, not through faith or emotion, but through pure ego. Imagine demons forgetting rage, cults worshipping only themselves, and the Emperor's light replaced by the heartbeat of a new god. What if one being could slash through the very concept of chaos and rebuild it in his image? This is the story of Sukuna's ascension and the birth of the Age of Malice. And if you genuinely enjoy this kind of dark storytelling, consider subscribing and liking the channel, but only if it truly resonates with you. They called it an echo in the warp at first, an indistinct tremor that refused to conform to any known pattern of psychic resonance. It was neither rage nor decay, neither desire nor deceit. It carried no trace of the emotions that nourished the four ruinous powers. The echo was something colder, denser, and infinitely more precise. It was pure ego, sharpened until it could wound reality itself. Across the segmentum obscurus, astropaths screamed the same name before their minds burst into static. Sukuna. Some carved the word into their palms. Others choked it out between spasms, as if the syllables were burning holes through their tongues. The choirs of Cadia went silent for a full hour, a silence that had never been recorded before. Every attempt to interpret the phenomenon returned the same impossible reading. This was a consciousness that had not been born of the warp, yet ruled it by instinct. Inquisitor Armand Vale of the Ordo Malleus first witnessed the manifestation. His strike cruiser, Omnis Judicium, was pursuing a minor demon revolt on a forgotten mining moon near the Cadian Gate. The uprising had been insignificant until the void itself split open, not torn as with a conventional rift, but cut, as though an unseen blade had sliced through existence. Through the gash stepped a figure shaped like a man but written in living scripture. 4 eyes gleamed crimson beneath twin mouths that smiled with hunger, while black markings crawled across his skin like molten ink. Each sigil pulsed in rhythm with the planet's crust, syncing his heartbeat to the world's dying core. Vale's sensors registered no warp signature. Instead, they recorded something worse, an absence of metaphysical law. Sukuna had not been summoned. He had arrived, drawn across dimensions by the sheer density of his own malice. Somewhere in a universe that no longer existed, his cursed energy had multiplied beyond containment, resonating with the psychic storms of the Immaterium until the barrier broke. The warp welcomed him like blood-welcoming infection, eager yet terrified of what had entered its veins. Within moments, demons loyal to Khorne began to convulse and tear each other apart. Sukuna's presence erased the impulses that defined them. When he struck, his blades did not cleave matter, they severed concepts. Rage vanished, lust extinguished, faith dissolved. The battlefield grew eerily quiet, populated only by empty shells of flesh that had forgotten why they existed. Vale's retinue tried to bombard the surface, but their munitions disintegrated mid-flight, unmade by invisible cuts that sliced through their trajectories. Then came the laughter, steady, deliberate, echoing through both real space and the warp. It was not madness or mirth. It was a statement of dominance, a declaration that hierarchy itself had been rewritten. Even the demon princes that prowled the nearby systems recoiled. They could sense a god taking shape. When the storm finally collapsed, a single monument remained on the scorched moon, a throne forged from bone and cursed script, vast enough to cast a shadow visible from orbit. The ground beneath it pulsed like living flesh, beating to the rhythm of a giant heart. Vale named it the Throne of Malice, and from that moment, the laws of chaos began to warp around a fifth axis. The other gods took notice. Khorne's blood seas boiled. Nurgle's gardens withered. Slaanesh's symphonies fell out of tune. Even Tzeentch's endless calculations faltered, unable to predict a being who could cut through destiny itself. Have you ever wondered which of the galaxy's corruptions would claim such a creature first? Drop your theories in the comments. I want to see how you'd survive the birth of a god. Within weeks, cults began to appear across imperial worlds, whispering of the king of curses. These heretics did not seek pleasure or decay. They sought power through self-worship. They believed salvation lay not in devotion, but in domination of one's own soul. They called themselves the Hands of Malice, and each bore a sigil resembling one of Sukuna's severed fingers. These relics radiated psychic noise so intense that trained psychers died upon contact. The Inquisition retrieved 3, before the rest vanished into the black markets of the Eye of Terror. Every analysis reached the same conclusion. The artifacts were fragments of a living god, each finger capable of rewriting matter, memory, and will. The Inquisition quarantined entire sectors, but suppression only fueled fascination. Rogue psychers discovered that channeling the cursed energy of the relics granted them new techniques, strikes that ruptured flesh without contact, words that turned air into blades. Yet every use corroded the user's mind. They began to see the world as Sukuna saw it, as prey. The Emperor's light grew faint in their eyes, replaced by a hunger to prove superiority. One inquisitorial scholar described it best. They do not fall to chaos, they fall to themselves. The Adeptus Mechanicus soon detected anomalies near the warp storms around the Cadian Gate. Machines began to dream. Servitors whispered prayers to their own reflections. Cogitators looped endlessly on a phrase translated as self is truth. Magidominus Hecrion theorized that Sukuna's presence was rewriting the psychic substrate of the galaxy, turning introspection into worship. The Mechanicus labeled the phenomenon techno-heresy pattern Sigma Ego. Purges followed, but the infection spread faster than flame. Vale's later transmissions describe his attempt to confront the entity directly. He descended upon the moon with 2 squads of grey knights, each carrying sanctified wards. The atmosphere itself resisted them, vibrating like stretched glass. When they reached the throne, Sukuna was waiting, bare-chested, smiling, his eyes gleaming with the same cold amusement that must have preceded 1,000 massacres. He spoke in a voice that bypassed sound, cutting directly into thought. "I have seen your gods," he said. "They feed on weakness. I am not hunger. I am proof." The Grey Knights attacked, their blades singing with Emperor's light. Sukuna caught the first blow bare-handed, and the silvered weapon dissolved into dust. The second knight's war chant faltered, as invisible lines carved through his armor and body alike. Within moments, 12 of humanity's finest were reduced to silence. Vale fired a psychic lance from orbit, a beam capable of searing titans to ash. The throne absorbed it like breath into lungs. When the light faded, Sukuna still sat upon it, unburned, smiling wider. In that instant, the warp itself shifted. A new current surged through it, not fueled by emotion, but by conviction. Demons across the eye screamed as their forms twisted, their allegiance uncertain. Some turned inward, folding their own essence into tighter, denser shapes. These were the first cursed spawn, demons who abandoned devotion to the old gods and sought power through internal mastery. The 4 great powers sensed the threat. For the first time in millennia, they agreed on something. They had to destroy the newcomer before he learned to cut them. Reports from Eldar Farseers confirmed the growing panic. They spoke of a blade within the Immaterium that no prophecy could block, a will so absolute it refracted time. Even the Necrons, who despised the warp, recorded disturbances within the Tomb World data streams. Sukuna's presence had begun to influence non-psychic systems, suggesting his domain reached beyond the Immaterium into the fabric of logic itself. Vale's final report ends abruptly. The transmission cuts off mid-sentence, but the fragment that survives remains carved into Ordo Malleus archives. He does not corrupt. He competes, and competition is the most dangerous faith of all. If you had such power within the Imperium, would you swear loyalty to its order, embrace heresy, or stand alone? Tell me in the comments. I'll be reading your choices carefully. In the months that followed, the galaxy convulsed as if the warp itself had inhaled poison. Astropaths across Segmentum Solar began collapsing mid-communion, their minds filled with visions of red sigils burning through eternity. Navigators spoke of storms that no longer obeyed the currents of chaos. Whole fleets went missing, their final messages describing glimpses of a throne made of living script floating within the Empyrean. The Imperium had endured countless demonic incursions before, but this was something new. There was no invasion. There was only a rewriting. At first, the existing Chaos Gods dismissed Sukuna as an anomaly, a wandering echo that would fade once devoured by the tides of the warp. But when the rivers of blood within Khorne's domain began to still, the Blood God took notice. His demons found themselves unable to rage, their fury siphoned into hollow silence. Khorne roared and sent legions to crush the interloper. They never returned. When Slaanesh tried to listen for the screams of the dying, they found only laughter. Cold, amused laughter that mocked the very concept of desire. Even Tzeentch's infinite plans began to fracture, threads cut cleanly from the tapestry of fate. And deep within his garden, Nurgle's plagues withered before they could bloom, unable to infect what was already poisoned by self-perfection. Sukuna had not merely entered their realm, he had contaminated it. Each of the four fed on weakness, rage, rot, lust, and change. But Sukuna's power was born from strength, the raw assertion of the self against everything else. His existence was antithetical to worship. Those who bowed to him did not pray, they sought to become him. Acolytes across dozens of demon worlds began carving his sigils into their flesh. The more they engraved, the more cursed energy they could channel. But unlike the gifts of chaos, this power did not ask for faith. It demanded self-ownership. Some used it to fight demons, others to challenge space marines, and many tore themselves apart in pursuit of perfection. In time, these heretics were called the Ascended, mortals who viewed themselves as extensions of Sukuna's will. When their bodies finally failed, their souls were drawn into his domain, merging into an expanding fortress within the warp, a Sera, domain expansion on a cosmic scale. The throne world of malice became a labyrinth of flesh, bone, and script. Every corridor pulsed with the heartbeat of ambition. Each wall whispered the same creed, I am my own god. From this realm flowed rivers of crimson light, coursing into the Immaterium and infecting it with structure. For the first time, the warp began to stabilize in certain regions, an unnatural stillness that horrified the other gods. To them, chaos was existence, order was death. But Sukuna's order was not peace. It was domination through willpower so absolute, it transcended entropy. Inquisitor Vale's ship was found drifting months later near the Halo stars. Every crewman was dead, their corpses carved with symbols resembling Sukuna's markings. Yet the bodies were arranged in geometric patterns, as if forming part of a massive, unseen spell. The ship's logs contained one final entry. He is building structure inside madness. The warp is learning to obey. Across the Imperium, the ecclesiarchy began to fracture. Preachers whispered of a god who granted strength without penance, glory without servitude. Some claimed they could hear his laughter through the prayers of the faithful. Inquisitors purged entire congregations, but for every cult burned, two more appeared. Even Astartes were not immune. One chapter of renegade Marines, once loyal to the Emperor, began tattooing their skin with black inscriptions. They called themselves the Severed, claiming that every mark cut them free from the burden of history. They believed the Emperor's golden corpse was merely another cage of worship, and Sukuna was the key to break it. Have you ever wondered how the Imperium would react if faith itself turned into heresy? Leave your thoughts below. Some ideas might be darker than anything I could imagine. The surviving Grey Knights attempted to seal the throne of malice through mass exorcism, deploying relics from the dark age of technology. They expected to face demons. Instead, they found humans, millions of them, kneeling before an empty throne, their eyes branded shut by radiant sigils. These were the cults that had reached his domain through meditation alone, their consciousnesses pulled into the warp by his will. The knights fought for days, cutting down the faithful, only to find their own reflections smiling back at them in pools of blood. Each kill spread more of the cursed symbols across the terrain. Every prayer uttered in the Emperor's name dissolved into the same mocking laughter. When their librarian finally invoked a cleansing psychic nova, it consumed them all. But the planet remained marked, a world of glass etched with runes that would not fade. Meanwhile, deep within the warp, the four gods convened. They had fought one another for eons, but now stood united against a threat that refused to follow their rules. Khorne struck first, manifesting armies of brass and rage. His demons poured into Sukuna's domain, roaring his name as challenge. Sukuna answered by smiling. One gesture split their ranks, not through force, but through division of identity. Each demon turned upon itself, halves fighting halves until all that remained were corpses of contradiction. When Khorne's own form appeared upon the horizon, Sukuna met him in silence. One strike crossed reality, severing both their essences for an instant. Khorne's laughter shook the warp, not from joy but recognition. He had found a worthy rival. Next came Nurgle's plagues, spilling through time, rotting suns and stars alike. Yet Sukuna's cursed energy consumed corruption, transforming it into perfect stasis. His laughter echoed through the grandfather's garden, leaving only sterile husks of forgotten disease. Slaanesh sent waves of temptation, illusions of pleasure and adoration. Sukuna tore them apart as easily as dreams, speaking only one phrase: "I do not need to be loved." Even Tzeentch, master of destiny, found his schemes collapsing when Sukuna's blades began slicing through possibilities themselves. For every plan, the changer of ways conceived, 10 were erased from existence before they could form. The architect screamed, his 1,000 beaks bleeding prophecy that no longer mattered. The 4 realized then that Sukuna was not a rival god to defeat. He was an idea, one that nullified the concept of worship itself. His domain thrived on will, not faith. The more his followers believed only in themselves, the stronger he grew. He was devouring belief as a resource, hollowing out the warp by replacing prayer with pride. In the Aeldari craft worlds, Farseers trembled as they glimpsed a reality where the gods themselves faded into silence, replaced by mortals convinced they were divine. Some whispered that the Rana Dandra, the final war, had already begun, not through armies, but through self-awareness. The Toe Empire detected psychic signals that mimicked command hierarchies, causing their drones to disobey the ethereals. Even the Necrons felt his echo. Their stasis fields flickered as their ancient coding began translating Sukuna's sigils as commands of control. The Imperium, blind to the full scope, called for the greatest exorcism in recorded history. Every planet aligned under the Adeptus Ministorum performed synchronized rites. The prayers were meant to drown out the laughter spreading through the warp. For a single day, the galaxy fell silent. Then came the pulse. Every world shuddered as a wave of crimson light burst from the Eye of Terror, washing across the stars. Psykers screamed, souls burned, and when the light faded, the Astronomicon flickered for the first time since the heresy. For 72 seconds, the Emperor's beacon went dark. What returned in its place was not the Emperor's radiance. It was a faint whisper. A voice carried on psychic wind. Calm, cold, absolute. I am the 5th. On that day, the scholars of the Ordo Malleus declared a new era, the Age of Malice. From then on, warp storms were no longer chaotic but rhythmic. Demon incursions grew rarer, yet deadlier. Entire sectors began reporting reality fractures shaped like slashes. Sukuna's presence had stabilized the warp just enough for humanity to travel faster, but at a price. Every jump risked exposure to his domain, where the traveler's reflection might open its eyes and refuse to follow orders. The Emperor's seers predicted apocalypse. The Inquisition predicted opportunity, and deep within the warp, Sukuna sat upon his throne, eyes closed, listening to the universe chant his creed. For the first time, the warp had a heartbeat that matched his own. For a time, the galaxy pretended that peace had returned. Warp storms calmed, trade lanes reopened, and ships crossed the void without vanishing into madness. But beneath that fragile order pulsed something new. Every translation through the warp carried the faint scent of iron and ink, as if the Immaterium itself had been branded. The navigators whispered that the Sea of Souls now possessed currents, slow and steady, all flowing toward a single horizon of crimson light. The Imperium called it stability. The Inquisition called it a silence of faith. Only a few understood that it was the pulse of Sukuna's will, spreading like a new law through creation. Inquisitor Lord Vale's successors gathered the remaining records of his final descent and pieced together a warning. They realized that Sukuna was not content to remain a god of the warp. He was learning to cross back, to impose his domain on real space. Each severed finger that had once served as a relic now began to move, twitching in vaults that no lock could hold. When the first finger awakened, it unleashed a storm that erased an entire Forge world from the records, cutting it so cleanly that even memory refused to recall its coordinates. The Adeptus Mechanicus called this phenomenon conceptual erasure. The Inquisition called it proof that the 5th god no longer needed the warp to act. Across demon worlds, the 4 convened one final time. The enemy they had mocked now threatened their thrones. Khorne roared his defiance, declaring that only battle could decide dominion. Nurgle croaked that resistance was futile, for even decay must submit to renewal. Slaanesh whispered that surrender might be the ultimate pleasure, while Tzeentch remained silent, every mouth sealed shut by invisible cuts. And so, They forged an alliance born of terror, a weapon that could anchor them against annihilation. They poured their essence into a singular convergence, an impossible storm at the heart of the warp. The result was a creature woven from their combined hate, a god engine of pure chaos called the confluence of the four. When the confluence rose, stars trembled. Its arrival bled across dimensions, turning time into ash. For the first time since the birth of the universe, the warp itself felt fear. Sukuna opened his eyes and stood from his throne. His laughter was gone. Only silence remained as he stepped forward, and with each stride, the architecture of his realm folded behind him like paper. He carried no weapon, for his existence was the blade. The clash was not a battle, but a rewriting. Where the confluence moved, reality screamed. Where Sukuna walked, it was silenced. Khorne's axes shattered against the void of self. Slaanesh's temptations dissolved before a will that craved nothing. Nurgle's decay halted, unable to touch perfection, and Tzeentch's prophecies evaporated as they tried to describe him. The confluence roared in agony, splitting apart as each god attempted to flee the union. But Sukuna's shadow fell upon them, and his voice cut through the warp like a verdict. You have lived on weakness. I am what comes after. He raised his hand, and the warp folded inward. The seas of emotion froze. Demons ceased their endless screaming. For a heartbeat, the galaxy knew stillness. And then he released them. The four did not die. Instead, they fragmented. Each was reduced to an aspect of the new hierarchy. Khorne became war-given form, Nurgle survival, Slaanesh experience, Tzeentch knowledge. They were no longer gods, but functions within a greater order. Pieces within the cursed Pantheon, ruled by Sukuna the Fifth. In real space, the Astronomicon flared brighter than ever before. The Emperor's followers cheered, believing his light had strengthened. But deep within the psychic core of terror, the Emperor stirred. His immortal soul, bound for 10,000 years, perceived the change. The light was not his, it was a mirror. The fifth god had touched the throne and turned it into a conduit for his domain. The Emperor's mind fought back, flooding the warp with his divine fury. But Sukuna's power flowed differently. It did not confront, it reflected. Every attack the Emperor launched returned multiplied, folding upon itself until his consciousness was trapped in a loop of resistance. For the first time since the heresy, he spoke aloud. Who are you? The answer came as a whisper from every shadow of the palace. I am what remains when faith ends. Outside, fleets vanished into shimmering rifts that resembled blades of light. Some reappeared centuries later, crewed by soldiers who worshipped no god and followed no command but their own. They claimed to have walked through the fifth domain, where every soul was forced to confront its reflection. Those who accepted their weakness vanished. Those who embraced it returned transformed, bearing the markings of Sukuna, yet loyal to no one. They became known as the Self-Forged, mercenaries of impossible power who could channel cursed energy like sorcery. Across the galaxy, the old chaos shrines decayed. Their followers, bereft of divine guidance, turned inward, carving their bodies into living scripture. Planets that once bled war now stood eerily quiet, their skies filled with sigils of faint light. Even the Inquisition began to fracture. Some lords claimed that the fifth god's reign brought balance, an end to the mindless excess of the warp. Others demanded total eradication, believing that self-worship was the purest form of heresy. Civil wars erupted within the Ordos. Each faction convinced it alone understood the true meaning of the new age. For ordinary mortals, life went on. They prayed to a silent emperor, unaware that their faith now fed something else entirely. Every whispered hope, every confession of guilt, was filtered through the structure Sukuna had imposed upon the Immaterium. The gods still listened, but only through him. And he did not grant mercy, only power to those strong enough to seize it. On the outer rim, a group of Eldari farseers attempted to peer into the future. They found nothing. The Rana Dandra, the prophesied end of all things, had dissolved. Time no longer flowed toward destruction, but toward reflection. The galaxy had become a mirror, infinite and closed. One farseer wrote, before dissolving into light, "He has cut the story itself." In the archives of terror, hidden deep beneath the ruins of the Scholastica Psychana, an unnamed scribe recorded the final truth. The fifth chaos god did not conquer. He corrected. The warp is no longer chaos, it is ego. The age of belief has ended. The age of definition has begun. And somewhere beyond the reach of both stars and souls, Sukuna sat upon a throne of stillness, eyes half closed, listening to a universe that had finally fallen silent. His laughter did not return, only a whisper escaped him, soft and satisfied. This is perfection.